welcome to our program. Please go ahead with your call.
Can you please explain Deuteronomy 28, verse 53 and 57?
Deuteronomy 28, verse 53 and 57?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's take a look at that. Deuteronomy 28, 53 says, "And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which Jehovah thy God has given thee in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee." And let me start in verse 56. "The tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness, her eye shall be evil toward the husband of her bosom, and toward her son, and toward her daughter, and toward her young one that cometh out from between her feet, and toward her children which she shall bear. For she shall eat them for want of all things secretly in the siege, and straitness wherewith thine enemy shall distress thee in thy gates." Now, Deuteronomy 28 is a chapter that lays out the blessings and the cursings. The first 14 verses describe the blessings of obedience. Verses 15 through the end, and it's a very long chapter, maybe 68 verses, that describe the curses that come upon disobedience or sin for the people of God. So the things we read here have much to do with God's judgment on the church, and the judgment on the church typified or likened in the Bible to famines and to when Jerusalem or a city of God was under siege. When there was a siege of an Israelite city, a city in Samaria or Jerusalem, and the enemy army was encompassed round about, and what that typically meant was that the city was cut off from food and water, except what they had in the city. And this is where the imagery of a famine comes from in the Bible that we find in Amos chapter 8, verse 11. It says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord Jehovah, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of Jehovah." And that historically, there would be a famine of bread and water, and we have a historical record, a biblical record, of just some terrible things that went on in a city that was besieged, where they were running out of food, and some women made a bargain that today we'll eat your son or my son, and tomorrow we'll eat the other one's son. And so they turned to devouring their own. And it's a picture of the spiritual famine that came upon the churches at the time of the end, which we know now because we're living at that time, and God has opened up the timeline of history, that it took place from May 21, 1988 through May 21, 2011, 23 exact years, 8,400 days. And this is the time that Jerusalem is said to be compassed about with armies, according to Luke 21, verse 20. And it's the time that Satan has overcome. Remember, historically, it was the king of Babylon who came against Jerusalem and besieged it and destroyed it. And the king of Babylon is a type of Satan. And so Satan comes against the camp of the saints, the churches and congregations of the world, and encompassing the city Jerusalem about, God is indicating the city will now experience famine, but not a famine of bread and water, literal bread and water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. And that statement would relate to Romans 10:17. Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. If there's a famine of hearing, then faith is not coming, and no one is experiencing the faith of Christ in order to be born again. So there is no salvation taking place within the besieged city because there's only famine there. And this is one of the reasons God commanded at that time over the second part of the Great Tribulation, when he was sending forth the latter rain outside the church, to depart out of the mist. Actually, I think we see that in Luke 21, verse 20. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. So the fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28 of an unfaithful, rebellious people, disobedient to the commandments of God, and these are the curses, was spiritually fulfilled during the judgment that began at the house of God, or the corporate church, over the course of the Great Tribulation. And this is the reason for the language, woe unto them that give suck in those days. And of course, there was no actual cannibalism of mothers doing that to their children on the physical level at all. But spiritually, the parents, in insisting and rebelliously refusing to hearken to what God commanded here, flee to the mountain, depart out, they stayed in the city, and so it was as though they consumed their own children. It's an ugly picture, ugly language, but it's just describing what happened on the spiritual level. When you devour your own children, you've killed them in an ugly way, but still you've killed them. And that's what the parents did to their children by holding them within the congregation and refusing again to obey the command of God to depart out of the church.